This is a nice paper from 2022 that looks at fomite transmission for COVID. And I'm going to start off on this section right here because this is the primary confusion that people have. This is a confounding limitation in our current research in that conventional epidemiologic studies can't distinguish between competing transmission pathways. So when you have droplet, aerosol, direct, or indirect transmission all simultaneously, you can't necessarily say this is the one for sure that is happening that caused the infection, which means that we have to look outside the conventional study methods to be able to understand if fomite transmission is possible and answering the question of how relevant is it. So starting with some terminology, droplets and aerosols are typically differentiated by 5 micrometers. So if it's smaller than 5 micrometers, it's generally considered an aerosol, and if it's greater than 5 micrometers, then it's considered a droplet. Next, there's direct contact and indirect contact for transmission. Direct contact would be something like shaking hands with an individual and then infecting yourself that way by like picking your nose or picking something out of your teeth. While indirect transmission would be touching a contaminated surface like a computer monitor, a surface, a counter, a doorknob, and then becoming infected by it that way. And we know definitively that individuals can contaminate surfaces and objects to create fomites by shedding COVID virus onto their hands and then touching them, or by droplets settling on those surfaces. For example, in one study, about 57% of rooms in hospitals were found to have at least one contaminated surface, while another study showed that outpatient healthcare facilities had surface contamination on dental chairs, sinks, keyboards, ophthalmoscopes, laboratory equipment, and door handles. So places that had greater contact had higher positivity rates. While even other studies have found that in households, COVID has been found in surfaces up to a month later, or about half of homes had detectable levels of COVID. And this could include surfaces such as home HVAC filters, floors, the tops of televisions, any common places where dust might build up. Furthermore, in community settings, COVID has been found on surfaces in playgrounds, supermarkets, cruise ship services, public transport vehicles, tourist recreational facilities, retail stores, and workplaces, in addition to things like ATMs, gas pumps, etc., places that are frequently touched. So the first part of the question is, can COVID exist on these surfaces? The answer is yes. And as we've mentioned in previous review papers, then there's also processed foods that have high touch, such as sushi and seafood, anything that's high preparation that has a high likelihood of being contaminated with COVID. And COVID has also been shown to survive for long periods of times on solid surfaces such as plastic, glass, and stainless steel and polymer banknotes for up to 28 days at 20 degrees Celsius. And to give this comparison to the flu, COVID can survive approximately 9 hours on skin, which is significantly longer than the survival time of influenza A, which is approximately 1.8 hours, indicating the stability of COVID is markedly higher. Additionally, studies have found that water cups are the most frequently contaminated site in the hospital rooms of patients with COVID. COVID virus can be detected in the water cup in room temperature environments for 48 days after the infected person has left that room, suggesting that water in the cup may play an important role in virus persistence. So we know COVID can survive on these surfaces. That is detected on a lot of surfaces. The next question is it infectious? So this one should be taken with a grain of salt, but interestingly, the Princess Diamond cruise ship outbreak was modeled mathematically, and these models suggest that short-range droplets, long-range aerosols, and fomite transmission modes contributed to 35, 35, and 30% of infected cases. So fomite transmission did seem to be relevant as a source of transmission for about 30% of all of the cases on the Princess Diamond cruise ship. And while in those types of things we can't tease apart if it's only aerosol, if it's only fomite transmission, we can utilize animal models to help answer these questions. And in a hamster model, there was robust evidence to support fomite transmission. So while airborne transmission is more efficient than fomite transmission, it is still an effective form of transmission for COVID. And importantly, hamsters that had fomite exposure, fomite transmission of COVID, displayed delayed replication kinetics, meaning it took longer to show symptoms. And other studies using the hamster model have also demonstrated COVID transmission via fomites in the absence of direct contact. So building on from the hand-to-mouth touching, there's also the concern of hand-to-eye. In rhesus monkeys, it was found that COVID can be contracted through direct conjunctival inoculation, but again, they developed less severe pulmonary disease than macaques inoculated via an intratracheal route. which in my mind together show pretty strong evidence that there is fomite transmission with COVID. And fomites from food transport is actually believed to cause outbreaks in China during their zero COVID policy, where fomite transmission through the frozen food supply constituted a critical problem by reintroducing the virus into a region that achieved local epidemic elimination, meaning they successfully eliminated the virus through traditional routes, but then food allowed it to re enter the region. So, without testing of these foods, this could become a very large problem because it could reintroduce older strains of the virus, older variants of COVID back into the population. So, hitting each of our points, COVID can survive on surfaces for very long periods of time. It's very stable and can survive in various environments, which can be hours to days depending on the surface temperature and humidity. And experimental animal models have proven that infections can occur via fomite transmission route.